Tonight, for the first time, President Joe Biden authorizing Ukraine to use long-range US missiles to strike Russia. A stunning change in policy, a major factor in the decision US officials say 10,000 North Korean troops arriving in Russia to fight alongside the Russians. Many expected to be part of a planned offensive to take back the Kursk region. Late today, President Zelensky saying the missiles will speak for themselves without a doubt.
Slava Ukraini.
Overnight, Russia unleashing its third largest attack against Ukraine this year, more than 200 missiles and drones, targeting power plants and energy infrastructure nationwide, killing at least 7 civilians, authorities say. This missile fragment carefully extracted after smashing through this apartment building. Residents in Kyiv fleeing to metro stations as city's power grid was forced to shut down as temperatures start to plummet. In Odessa, where the water was shut down, this woman saying her family has run out of its emergency supply. She's back for more. She'll carry home by hand. Lindsay, I think for the Russians, they're going to regard this as a major escalation. But the reality is they're going to have to wait for the next administration, the Trump administration, and see actually where policy truly lies. Lindsay?
Joint declaration of support for Ukraine, recovery and reconstruction to make it clear. We stand with Ukraine, now and in the future. That starts on the battlefield. I'm determined to ensure that Ukraine has what it needs to prevail in its fight for its survival. Tomorrow, I will announce a series of actions to accelerate support for Ukraine's military. This war has shown the Ukrainians can do anything they set their minds to. Today, we show the Ukrainians you're not alone. You're not alone in this fight.
It's being reported this evening that President Biden has lifted restrictions on Ukraine using US weapons to strike deeper inside Russia. President Zelensky has been pushing Western allies to allow his forces to use the missiles. It's believed the decision could help shift momentum in the conflict.
In the updated version of the document, aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear state, but with the support of a nuclear state, is proposed to be considered as their joint attack on Russia. Russia will also consider the possibility of using nuclear weapons when receiving reliable information about a massive launch of means of aerospace attack and their crossing of our state border. This includes strategic and tactical aircraft, as well as cruise missiles and drones, hypersonic and other delivery vehicles. Russia reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in case of aggression, including if the enemy, using conventional weapons, poses a critical threat.
The plan to strengthen Ukraine is the Victory Plan, which I presented to our partners. One of its key points is long-range capabilities for our army. Today, there's a lot of talk in the media about us receiving permission for respective actions. But strikes are not carried out with words. Such things are not announced. Missiles will speak for themselves. They certainly will.
U.S. President Joe Biden has authorized Ukraine to use U.S.-supplied long-range missiles for strikes deep inside Russia. This major policy shift comes after months of requests by Ukraine and just 2 months before President-elect Donald Trump takes office. Trump has criticized Biden's strong support for Ukraine.
Deborah, it is a significant shift. It's something that President Zelensky has been calling for a long time.
It's a hugely important moment and a massive boost for the Ukrainians. Like you said, the Ukrainian president has been lobbying hard with the United States to try to get the US president to lift restrictions specifically on long-range missiles after months of deliberating over whether or not he was going to allow the Ukrainians to use these long-range army tactical missile systems. They are ballistic missiles launched from ground-based systems against targets inside Russia, something that the Americans seem to have been hesitant to allow, concerned that it might then prompt an escalatory response by Russia. But according to reports in the New York Times, the sudden decision by the North Koreans to join Russian forces on the battlefield at the moment inside Russia, fighting against Ukrainian troops that have seized parts of the Kursk region, that is the trigger for this decision by the United States. And now all eyes surely are going to be on other allies of Ukraine, the UK, for example, which has for a long time also been asked by the Ukrainians to allow its forces to use their Storm Shadow cruise missiles against targets inside Russia. The British have been more forward-leaning, more seemingly willing to allow the Ukrainians to use these weapons, but had been waiting for a decision by the United States. Now that seems to have come.
Дни мы видим и слышим, как на очень высоком уровне Великобритании и США муссируется тема о том, что киевский режим сможет наносить удар вглубь территории России западными вооружениями большой дальности. И, судя по всему, это решение либо вот-вот будет принято, либо, судя по всему, вообще уже принято. И эта вещь, конечно, экстраординарная. Хотелось попросить прокомментировать то, что происходит.
Происходит попытка подмены понятий, потому что речь не идет о разрешении или запрете киевскому режиму наносить удары по российской территории. Он и так наносит с помощью беспилотных летательных аппаратов и другими средствами, но когда речь идет об использовании высокоточного оружия большой дальности западного производства, это совершенно другая история. Дело в том, что я уже об этом говорил, и любые эксперты это подтвердят, и у нас, и на Западе, наносить удары современными высокоточными системами большой дальности западного производства украинская армия не в состоянии. Она не может этого делать. Это возможно только с использованием разведданных со спутников, которыми Украина не располагает. Это данные только со спутников или Евросоюза, либо на Соединенных Штатах, в общем, с натовских спутников. Это первое. Второе, и очень важное, может быть, ключевое, заключается в том, что полетные задания в эти ракетные системы могут, по сути, вносить только военнослужащие стран НАТО. Украинские военнослужащие делать это не могут. И поэтому речь идет не о том, чтобы разрешать украинскому режиму наносить удары по России этим оружием или не разрешать. Речь идет о том, чтобы принять решение о том, что страны НАТО напрямую участвуют в военном конфликте или нет. Если это решение будет принято, это будет означать не что иное, как прямое участие стран НАТО, Соединенных Штатов, европейских стран в войне на Украине. Это их прямое участие. И это уже, конечно, существенным образом меняет саму суть, саму природу конфликта. Это будет означать, что страны НАТО, США, европейские страны воюют с Россией. А если это так, то, имея в виду изменение самой сути этого конфликта, мы будем принимать соответствующие решения, исходя из тех угроз, которые нам будут создавать.
President Zelensky, thank you so much. Before you go, if you want to share, what keeps you going? Do you ever feel defeated?
I have a lot of power, but even feeling strong and have a lot of energy, it doesn't mean that we want to fight all our life, because the price is high, like I said, because the war takes the best of us, the best heroes, the best men, women, children. That's it. But we are not ready to give our freedom to this terrorist Putin. That's it. That's why we are fighting. That's it.
Nevertheless, this is a stark warning to the West, the latest in a slew of such. Previously, Vladimir Putin had come out and said that if advanced Western missiles with great ranges are supplied to Ukraine and used against Russia for strikes deep into Russian territory, then those countries, the United States perhaps, or Great Britain or France, which supply Ukraine with extended range missiles, that they will be complicit in an attack on Russia. Russia has brushed off their arguments that they merely hand these weapons over. Russia says it has evidence, and there is no way that Ukraine can plan, launch and use these weapons without without NATO troops being involved, without NATO technical staff being involved, without NATO intelligence and NATO satellites being involved. But this comes at a dangerous time, at a time when many Western leaders are saying, ignore Putin and Russia's warnings, supply Ukraine with these missiles, and undoubtedly, even though they won't change anything, undoubtedly, Ukraine, they believe, will be able to resist Russia further. An argument that both military experts and the Russian government have said is in itself senseless.
We are seeing celebratory announcements about this report of ATACMS, the permission to use ATACMS. We are already seeing people releasing maps of exactly how far into Russia these ATACMS can reach. Now, of course, the current reports seem to indicate that the initial permission would be for Kursk, but these maps already show the range across Russia. And also, military bloggers here are analyzing that could this be Biden's attempt to torpedo any effort by the Trump administration to bring a peace that is forced not on Kyiv's terms but on Moscow's. And of course, they believe that in the next 2 months, Ukraine could do a lot with these permissions. It does seem that US officials think, however, that this will not change the course of the war, at least according to the reports that we're seeing on US media.
And staying in Ukraine, authorities there say all regions of the country will face power cuts on Monday after fresh damage to the country's energy infrastructure. In Russia's largest bombardment in months, more than 200 missiles and drones targeted energy infrastructure across the country. Moscow has stepped up attacks in recent days, and fears are mounting in Ukraine that Russia will attempt to cripple energy infrastructure as the winter approaches.
It's no secret that I'm leaving office in January.
И мы же двигаемся к НАТО, а НАТО двигается к нам. Поэтому говорить о том, что Россия ведет себя агрессивно, по меньшей мере не соответствует здравой логике. Мы что ли пришли на границу куда-то? К нам же подошла инфраструктура НАТО.
President Putin actually sent a draft treaty that he wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was what he sent us. And that was a precondition for not invade Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that. So he went to war to prevent NATO, more NATO close to his borders.
Flashback.
This is fundamentally not about NATO expansion.
It was never about NATO enlargement.
It's not about NATO.
It's not about NATO expanding toward Russia.
This was never about NATO.
It's absolutely nothing to do with NATO expansionism.
And it has nothing to do with NATO.
This is not about NATO.
It's not about NATO.
It's not really about NATO.
This is not about NATO.
Seriously, it's not about NATO.
This was never about NATO.
It was never about NATO. Let's be honest.
This doesn't have anything to do with NATO.
Nothing to do with NATO at all.
Yeah, he's claiming it's like security purposes, but we can see the clear reason.
But NATO is not the reason.
This is not about NATO expansion. This is about the democratic expansion.
Ukraine bans religious organizations.
We are protecting democracy right now.
Ukraine is banning political parties.
Because it's a democracy.
Ukraine restricts books and music.
It's about democracy.
Ukraine won't hold elections.
It's about democracy.
And it's not about NATO expansion.
This war in Ukraine is not about NATO.
It's not about NATO.
That's not about NATO.
It has nothing to do with NATO.
Nothing to do with NATO expansion.
It's not about NATO expansion.
Nothing to do with NATO.
It isn't really about NATO.
It's not about NATO.
It's not about NATO enlargement. In fact, it has nothing to do with NATO.
It's not about NATO encroaching.
It's not about NATO. NATO is just a fictitious, imaginary adversary for Mr. Putin and for Russia.
It was never about NATO.
That's not what it's been about. It's been about him trying to expand his sphere of influence.
Hang on, I mean, the two are not mutually exclusive. Obviously, Russia has wished for a sphere of influence over Ukraine, but if the West had not challenged Russian interests so directly, I think that there was a chance to avoid this war.
He wanted us to sign a promise never to enlarge NATO. We rejected that.
The reason why Putin invaded Ukraine is because of his evil.
It's
about that Putin wants to rebuild Soviet empire of evil, like President Reagan told.
It's about Putin being sick.
I don't know how you negotiate peace with a madman, but
Nobody negotiated with Hitler.
People are comparing him to Hitler.
And remember Hitler.
He's a Hitler.
We're back when the Nazis invaded Poland.
This is exactly the same what Hitler was doing to Jews.
This is the same. Putin will not stop.
Putin is reminiscent of Hitler.
Hitler.
This reminds me of Hitler.
Hitler.
He's the new Hitler.
Well, Hitler.
This is about a butcher trying to kill people everywhere in the world, just not Ukraine, Syria, all over the place.
I hear you. Senator Lindsey Graham, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I think that the reason we are as involved in Ukraine as we are is because Afghanistan wound down. And I think that the reason we are as involved in Ukraine as we are is because Afghanistan wound down. And if we still had Afghanistan to launder money through, there probably wouldn't be the need for this type of excessive involvement in Ukraine. But I think we can look at Afghanistan and we can look at what's going on here and say what a lot of these defense contractors are pushing toward is how to have an extended kind of low yield war. Like if there's a way to stretch this thing out, turn it into a 20, 30 year kind of thing where there's a whole lot of money moving around and unaccountable pots and a lot of weapons getting bought. And then, oh man, the stockpiles, well, we got to spend more money to reload those.
We have never been closer to World War III than we are today under Joe Biden. A global conflict between nuclear-armed powers would mean death and destruction on a scale unmatched in human history. It would be nuclear Armageddon. Nothing is more important than avoiding that nightmare. We will avoid it, but we need new leadership. Every day this proxy battle in Ukraine continues, we risk global war. We must be absolutely clear that our objective is to immediately have a total cessation of hostilities. All shooting has to stop. This is the central issue. We need peace without delay. In addition, there must also be a complete commitment to dismantling the entire globalist neocon establishment that is perpetually dragging us into endless wars, pretending to fight for freedom and democracy abroad, while they turn us into a third world country and a third world dictatorship right here at home. The State Department, the defense bureaucracy, the intelligence services, and all of the rest need to be completely overhauled and reconstituted to fire the deep staters and put America first. We have to put America first. Finally, we have to finish the process we began under my administration of fundamentally reevaluating NATO's purpose and NATO's mission. Our foreign policy establishment keeps trying to pull the world into conflict with a nuclear-armed Russia based on the lie that Russia represents our greatest threat. But the greatest threat to Western civilization today is not Russia. It's probably, more than anything else, ourselves and some of the horrible USA-hating people that represent us. It's the abolition of our national borders. It's the failure to police our own cities. It's the destruction of the rule of law from within. It's the collapse of the nuclear family and fertility rates like nobody can believe is happening. It's the Marxists who would have us become a godless nation worshiping at the altar of race and gender and environment. And it's the globalist class that has made us totally dependent on China and other foreign countries that basically hate us. These globalists want to squander all of America's strength, blood, and treasure, chasing monsters and phantoms overseas while keeping us distracted from the havoc they're creating right here at home. These forces are doing more damage to America than Russia and China could ever have dreamed. Evicting this sick and corrupt establishment is the monumental task for the next president, and I am the only one who can do it. I'm the only one that can get the job done. I know exactly what has to be done.